When I was a little girl, I lived in an apartment complex with my mother. The entire complex consisted of 2 buildings that sat side by side, less than 100 feet apart, with 4 two-bedroom flats, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs. We lived about 100 yards down the hill from a major 5-lane road, but you would have never known due to the thick woods that bordered the complex on 3 sides. The last side was an area cut for power lines that ran next to our driveway with a graveyard directly beyond it. It should go without saying that this setup was a recipe for many childish shenanigans, as well as creepy encounters. On the front side of the complex and along the power line side were thick blackberry brambles. They weren't quite as thick along the power line area, but in the front of the apartment, you couldn't stick your arm in without being torn apart by the thorns. And it was so thick, it was nearly impossible to push through. This will be relevant later. I was the only young child that lived there full time, and all the neighbors were, to the best of my knowledge, fond of me. I was active in Girl Scout, so when it was time, I would go around to all the neighbors for orders. When the cookies came in, I'd get my little wagon and deliver them to the neighbors by myself because my mother knew and trusted them. The day this happened, I had taken my wagon to the other building to deliver cookies. I hadn't meant to stay as long as I had, but my mother's friend's husband had bought some new fish. I was fascinated with their aquarium, so I had spent about 45 minutes helping them pick out names. When I began to walk back, dusk had fallen. I had walked about 7 steps off their porch when I got a bad feeling. And now that I'm older, I understand I'm an empath and have learned to listen to my intuition. But back then, I just thought I had to poo. Like bad. I stopped for a second to settle my stomach and heard a noise. When I looked to the front of the apartments where the blackberries were the most thick, initially I couldn't see anything. I forget exactly what alerted me to his presence, but I think he flicked a lighter or something. It was like he was trying to purposely alert me to his presence. The second I saw him, I froze. He had a shoulder-length stringy black hair, bad skin, and looked like a skeleton. He was so skinny. Knowing what I know now, I imagine he was probably strung out. I realized when he knew I saw him because his face split in a wicked and not at all friendly grin. Then he began tearing his way through the blackberry brambles towards me. I began running towards my house while screaming bloody murder. Even over my screams, I heard his feet slap the pavement behind me. I got to my steps, and my Uncle Mike, who lived next door, flung his door open to see what the hell was going on. And I began screaming and crying about the man that had chased me out of the woods. But the man had disappeared. Mike hadn't seen him, so initially he thought that I let my imagination run away with me. But when they looked at the area that I said he'd emerged from, there was a clear area of broken brush and blood from where he'd been cut by the thorns. After they took their machete to cut away the brambles and investigate where he'd come from, they discovered an area he'd been standing in with a small pile of cigarette butts, like he stood there waiting for me when he saw me walk across initially. A few weeks later, deeper in the woods, my mother's boyfriend and I discovered a small tent with assorted paraphernalia and very disturbing porn. No one mentioned the connection, but I was very mature for my age, so when I thought about it, it disturbed me very much. So, disturbing stranger that departed your fucked tent to watch me from the woods, let's not meet again.
Okay, so I remember another story for you. But it happened to my husband, and fiance at the time. We used to live in a neighborhood that had a dirt trail that ran behind several neighborhoods, ending up at a pathed wooded area that led into a shopping center. My husband and I would run it together sometimes with two of our dogs, and he would also run it alone as well with one. One day he was running it with our dog, Lily, who was a pit lab mix, about 60 pounds. When he hits the paved part of the run, all of a sudden this big Rottweiler comes out of nowhere and charges them while snarling. My husband was able to react quick and kick the dog right in the face, and it sent him sprawling. Lily started to square up because while she loves dogs, she isn't afraid to go after one that isn't friendly. So as the Rottweiler's starting to get up and getting his feet right, my husband starts dragging Lily away back to the dirt trail to get home. As he's doing this, he noticed a man standing roughly 10 feet off the paved path in the woods. Just standing there, watching everything unfold. Not calling his dog back, not saying a damned word. Just standing there. It was probably about 6'2" and largely built. Luckily, my husband got back unharmed and told me what happened. First thing that came to my mind was, that's suspicious as fuck. We called the police and drove down to the shopping center. I took a bat just in case, but basically my logic was I didn't want anybody going down the path until the police searched it. All in all, it probably took my husband 10 minutes to get home after the encounter, and 5 minutes to drive there. But the guy was gone, as was his dog. I stopped a lady and her dog from going down to the paved path, and came across two men pushing a baby stroller and warned them as well. I couldn't imagine that poor dog or baby being mauled. In my mind, this dude was up to no good. There's no reason to unleash your dog there, especially one that isn't trained. And there's absolutely no reason to be lurking in the woods 10 feet off the path. I definitely feel he was hoping his dog would distract someone and then he could attack them and they would never see it coming. I don't know what he wanted, but I can tell you he was not expecting my husband to kick his dog in the face and send it sprawling, or for him to have a dog ready to square the fuck up against his. Police searched, but like I said, he was gone. So they just issued an alert throughout the area to be careful and not walk or run alone.
About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My playground? The Chickasaw National Recreation Area. I loved that park so much, and I rode more miles on my bike than anywhere else. I've walked nearly every trail and rode every road. Every day, I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, however, I had rode out a bit further than usual, and on my way back, however, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roam, and there is a large spring or fountain there for all to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a stone bridge across the creek, then up the road to my home. It was dark at this time, and all I had to use to see was the full moon. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when I got a sharp in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. Then I heard a noise, sounding like something hitting the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock, about the size of a baseball rolling across the trail. Me confused, starts to look up the side of this hill. And just as I turn my head to look, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down and hitting my front wheel. I finally have my eyes adjust to look at someone very tall and dark and covered in hair at the top of the hill throwing things at me and screaming. I yelled that I had a cell phone and that I was going to call the police. I didn't actually have one, as I didn't have a cell phone yet. This seemed to have pissed it or him off, and he started charging down the hill at me. I, for obvious reasons, light up bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a huge splashing noise in the creek and seen it was a large rock that had been thrown. I was in the clear to home but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station later the next morning and told the ranger. I knew there about what happened. He says, "So, you were attacked by Bigfoot?" Snidely laughing. I don't know what it was, but something was trying to hurt me out there. Okay, Justin, if I have any more Bigfoot, I'll let you know what we got. I just said fine and left. The very next week I was riding in the daylight when the PR pulled up next to me and said for me to get in. I asked why. He said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town, and before we got out of the car, he turns to me and says, "Justin, I have to give you a huge apology. I will be honest that I didn't believe you when you told me the story of you being attacked. However, it has come to my attention that a couple was out in the same area last night and was attacked in the same way, saying they had seen a large, hairy creature throwing rocks and sticks and screaming at them. They called the police and they came out with some of the other rangers, including myself. I immediately thought about what you had told me. When we arrived and started up the hill, sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us. Guns drawn and yelling, 2 officers tackled a man to the ground. He was 6'5", tall, naked, covered in mud and had long hair and a large beard. He had escaped from the Veterans Center across Veterans Lake, and apparently he thought he was back in Vietnam and he was trying to take out the enemy. PR said I was very lucky because he was trying to kill me. We went inside so I could give the police my statement as to what had happened. They had him sent to a more secure facility somewhere else. And to this day, I still get shivers when I hike that trail, and I always keep my eyes on the ridge top. I do feel bad for the ones with PTSD and such mental illnesses. But, Mr. Crazy Naked Bigfoot Man, let's not meet again.
Years ago, me, my family, and family friends would go camping at some cabins in Lake Placid, New York. Despite what happened that weekend, the campground holds very fond memories for me that I will cherish forever. The incident happened 4th of July weekend. My family was grilling, and me and my friends, children at the time, were running around and playing cops and robbers. While we played, the campground owner came over to my parents and offered to pay for some food. My parents, being nice, gave him food and beer for free. Eventually, the owner overstayed his welcome and was asked to leave by my friend's dad. This angered him, and he took off his shirt trying to fight him. None of us were aware that he was an alcoholic and was already drunk when he asked for food and beer. They eventually got him to leave, but after a while he came back, this time with his rifle. As me and my friends played, he walked around drunkenly trying to load the rifle. One of my friends, being an innocent kid, walked over to him and asked what he was doing. The owner said, "I'm going to show your dad something." One of the adults saw this and rushed over. My friend's dad took the rifle from his hands and threw it across the parking lot, screaming at him that there were kids around. At this point, I knew something bad was happening and I rushed all of my friends over to inside our cabin. At this point, my dad called the police and was recording the whole thing. The police eventually came and arrested him. For the night, the campground owner tried to claim he had never had a rifle, even though we had him caught on video saying, "Give me my rifle." Police came back the next morning and let us file a temporary restraining order while we stayed the weekend. While this is an incident my family laughs at from time to time, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he had gotten that rifle loaded. So, campground owner, let's not meet.
To understand my story, you sort of have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in my country, and that we don't have any so long as you're respectful and non-destructive. You can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, as long as once you leave the area is how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of my parents, friends, and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There are always yachts bobbing just off the shore with people in them and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was in the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip in spring of 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in winter of 2010. After picking her out that November from a shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I paid her adoption fee. I know you guys love dogs, and she will be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a little about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dog fighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my guess is Lurcher/Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people and most dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her, or she'll have you. So by the time of this camping trip, I'd had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but as far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips, so when we all piled into the car, she came too. Unusually though, none of the family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my dad, and my mom, and I didn't mind. I wasn't that attached to the other kids, and I'd rather play with my dog, and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we'd left a bit later, although I don't remember why we'd left later than normal, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up, and the beach illuminated in campfires. But the beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and was trying to build the tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window from the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of the year, and I wanted her to have air. Always gotta be looking out for my furry little homie. As we're fumbling about in the dark on a beach in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big zero shape if you felt like it. I wasn't really paying any attention to the road. I was complaining I was tired, as kids are wont to do, but my mom was. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, my mom's asking him, "Have you seen that car drive around? It's been a few times." My dad kinda shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more times, a car pulled up next to ours on the road and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out here at this point, and I think my mom said that it must be security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the Wildlife Trust or something, as they do occasionally come down to do their nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high because he had that stagger to him, and there was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool, a junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into flashlight range, we realized he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches. And although I was small at that time, so maybe my sense of scale was off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him. Once he saw this, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mallet, and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy and told him that was fine and that we'd leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting, and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying, and I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were going to fight, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad, and possibly us as well, once he was done, as I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she always put Dad and her relationship with him above us. But this isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black, like a wolf descending on its prey, took us all by surprise, most of all the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator large canines represent in nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife as it had been in the arm she had got him by. He kicked her, he punched her, and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we could, we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident. I looked Parmy over as she was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I had left it. We think what happened was when the shouting started, she must have put her paws up on the gap that I'd left for her, as it was an old car and had the rolly down windows and not an electric button. We think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. But this is not the end of my story. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book into a hotel for the night. My parents decided just to drive home so we could all feel safe, but first had to drive into the nearest town for petrol as they were kind of low. I spent the time trying to clean up Parmesan up a little, and I'd always loved dogs, but what she just done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look and stuck his head out of the window to get a better look at that sign. My mom asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart fucking sank. Parked in the corner behind the van so we hadn't seen him at first was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad, and without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was removed. The next town over was 60 miles away, and he didn't have that much petrol. We realized as we began driving. We were going to break down, and that's fine, Dad said. We had AA cover. They'd come tow us home, or at least to somewhere acceptable for the night, better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 5 minutes, lights flashed us from behind. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He must have realized that we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life, and I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps so it wouldn't upset us, but we weren't really little kids. We were both double digits, and we knew how dangerous the situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E for empty for the last 10 miles, and we were driving on fumes. I don't really believe in God, but if He does exist, that was definitely one of His miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. Sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home, just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mom phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently, the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description given of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he actually was the guy or just a random psycho. As I said, they never got back to her. So, what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy man on the beach, let's not meet. Well, for me, it's that I love Parmesan. She's still with us now, old as the hills, and twice as grizzled as one of my mom's friends likes to joke. I don't know why she did what she did that day. I couldn't tell you what her thought process was. What I do know is that this poor puppy was born into an environment where they abused and neglected her, only to be rescued and taken to a shelter where her mother and siblings all found homes before her. Despite how badly people had treated her, when I took her home she forgave, but never forgot. I think the saying is, I never trust a person who doesn't like a dog, but I always trust a dog when they don't like a person. They have a very good understanding of the human body language, and I think she must have understood how much danger we were in. If you're able to adopt, please adopt. You might find yourself in a situation like mine one day, and I promise you, if you're willing to save a four-legged friend's life, they will pay you back tenfold if they are able to. Without a thought for their own safety, I paid 78 euros for Parmesan's adoption fee, which is a lot when you're a kid, but it chills me to my bones knowing that if I hadn't been so instant on a dog, I might be dead.
I want to start off this post by saying I was between the ages of say 10 to 12 when this happened. I don't remember exactly what year it was. I'm in high school now, so this was a few years ago. At my old apartment building complex, the parking lot was a circle. There was a staircase off of the parking lot down to a cement platform where kids could play, do sidewalk chalk, sports, etc. Cracked asphalt led through the woods to the other side of the neighborhood, which was regular single-family homes. One day, a man walked out of the woods and up both flights of stairs. He was wearing a full-body black Grim Reaper-style cloak and was making circles around the parking lot. My mom, who was a single mom, made the wise decision not to run any errands until he had left. Hours passed. 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. The cloaked man was still there, looping the parking lot. By this time, the sun was setting, and my dad came to pick me up after dinner to go to his house. When we got back, guess who was still there? The cloaked man. The sky was black, and the cloaked man was shrouded in darkness. Our HOA sucked, and all the streetlights were burned out. Our headlights illuminated him as we drove by. I saw him more clearly this time. His head bowed, the cloak completely covering his face. Hours had passed, and by the time I went to bed, the cloaked man was still wandering. He had been wandering the parking lot for the entire day. When I tell you this man was walking for at least 12 hours, this would not even be an exaggeration. And luckily, when I woke up the next day, he was gone without a trace. And I never saw him again.
This happened in the early 2000s, and I was probably in first grade or a year younger, and this was in Bulgaria. I am from a mid-sized town, not too small, not too big, the perfect one for raising your children. Crime is pretty much unheard of, and you can sleep outside on a bench and nothing would happen to you. One weekend, some family friends from a nearby town came to my town to visit, and my parents and I decided to go to the park with them. Now, it is important to say that all of the parks in my town are located right on the edge of town. So they are actually park/forest, and at some point, the park becomes a forest. Since it's not a very big town, we don't have central parks. In the park that we went to, it runs along a river, so it is a very narrow alley, but a very long one. And on one side there is a river, and on the other, there is a thick forest and cliffs. At that time, I didn't like the park so much because it was a very long walk, and you had to walk a lot to get to the end of it. So, like most kids, I got bored of walking with my parents and the other family since they were talking grown-up stuff, and I didn't want to listen to them. I decided to run off ahead, and by ahead, I mean out of sight from my parents. Keep in mind that this is a one-alley park, which you walk only straight forward with slight curves due to the river, so I had gone pretty far. Usually in this park, there are always people, and it's quite crowded on the weekends. But since it was summer, most people were on family vacations, and it was surprisingly empty, and I couldn't see anyone in a straight line in either way. At that point, I started hearing something in the forest, which was pretty loud since on the other side was the river and it was loud by itself. I stopped and started staring into the forest, and I saw how the bushes were moving and coming in my direction. I was still pretty clueless to what was happening until I saw a freaking man with long hair, a band across his forehead, dressed like a hunter with an air rifle on his back, running full speed towards me. There was no freezing moment. I just started running in the opposite direction and screaming my lungs out for my parents, hoping that they could hear me. But because of the river, I doubt that anyone could have heard me from 100 meters away. I remember looking backward and seeing him still chasing me, and I was thinking, okay, maybe this is the end. It's over. And then I was imagining how he would catch me and drag me into the forest and I would never see my family and friends again. It felt like an eternity, but I finally saw my parents and our family friends. My whole face was red and I was crying and snotting like crazy, barely even breathing. The hunter also stopped running after he saw my parents and the others. And I remember my parents started screaming at him, like what the hell was he doing? I don't remember what he exactly said. I was just relieved that it was over. But I remember him shaking his head like saying, I did nothing wrong. I was only trying to help him. The weirdest part was that there is no game in that park. It is a park after all, and the forest that he was hiding is a max 50 meters in width before the cliffs begin. So it is impossible to have any game there since there are always people walking there. You can see wild foxes, but that's about it. You need to go beyond the park out in the forest to hunt game. Also, it is highly illegal to carry a firearm out in public. We have very strict laws on firearms. Only police or military personnel are allowed to carry firearms. I don't know anyone who owns a gun. Civilians are allowed to register only air guns for hunting. No hardcore weapons allowed, and of course, you are not allowed to carry them in a park where there are people. Only in regulated zones for hunting game, away from populated zones. You would never see hunters like that unless you go to these zones, or you are in a village, which is still pretty rare. And no, we didn't report it afterward. It was too much of a hassle. This was the first and last time that something like that has happened to me. Thankfully, and I haven't developed fear from that place. Even now, when I go back to my town, I go running in that park after midnight, and I am perfectly fine. So, to the crazy hunter in the park who was only trying to help me, let's never meet again. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.